Hello everybody and welcome to the Year 5 CEM lesson for Block 2, week number 3. This lesson will be covering English. My name is Luke Lloyd and let's get started. So here are the slides. Again, we're going to be looking very much at the comprehension style. We'll talk through, we'll recap some of the skills we've covered in the first 2 weeks, then we'll tackle some questions together. But before we go on to do any of that, we have a spelling test. So if you can all make sure, please, you've got somewhere to write the spellings down. Again, by all means, pause the video if you need a bit of time to get set up. But I'll be running through the week 2 spellings. Again, I'll repeat every single word twice, and I'll try and also put the words in a sentence so you understand the context and you know what words I'm asking you for. I would ask that any words that you misspell or any words that you didn't know the meaning of get added to your words to learn section and you learn them. But please note we want you to learn both the meaning and the spelling. Vocabulary is still incredibly important, and so we would ask that you keep learning it. Right, so at the beginning, word number 1, the first word is commercial. I watched a commercial on TV for toothpaste. Commercial. Then number 2, we've just done the initial part of the test. The word is initial, meaning first. Number 2, initial. Number 3, it's crucial you try your best. The word crucial, meaning very important. Crucial. Number 4, you might go to a residential part of a city, and the word is residential, meaning where people live, where the dwellings and homes are located. Number 4, residential. Number 5, if you described your house as being palatial, it means palace-like. And so the word is palatial. Palace-like usually means huge and opulent and very exciting. Number 6, if you were going to make a sacrifice of either your time, your energy, your effort, or in the old days you were hearing about the sacrifices made to ancient gods, you would describe things as being sacrificial. So you might have a sacrificial lamb. So the word for number 6, please, is to spell sacrificial. If you tell someone something that they have to keep secret, so information that's not to be shared, that information is confidential. So number 7, the word is confidential, meaning not to be shared around. A bit like a secret. Number 8 is artificial. Artificial meaning fake or replacement. You might have an artificial hand, for example. Prosthetic. But the word number 8, artificial. Number 9, if something is officially recognized, you describe it as being official. Official. And finally, if something is good for you, number 10, we would describe it as being beneficial. Beneficial. Right, guys, so that's the spellings. Hopefully that was long enough. Again, if you need to rewind it, by all means do. Or pause now if you've not quite finished, because here are the answers. So let me just reveal them to you. That's them. Here's a larger version as well that you can just have a look at. Again, remember to copy into the words to learn section both things that you misspelt or if you didn't know the definitions. And if you're not sure, again, you can listen to my explanations again, or just as validly, you can just look them up, use Google, nice and quick, get them copied down into your word and meaning book so you're ready to progress. That's very important. So, finished there. We're about to move on, but before we do, I actually want to just talk you through a bit of a recap of some of the materials done before. So we will be going to page 13 of the comprehension workbook, but before you do, just a few questions I want to ask you and get you thinking about. And this is going to kind of recap the skills we've covered in comprehension thus far. So, in week 1, we should have read a little about the Arthurian story about King Arthur, the knight from the king from Camelot and his knights, and how he got lost. And one of the primary skills we were focusing on there is summarizing what occurred in the passage. And of course, the reason summarizing is so important is it helps us maintain in our minds a picture of the entire story. And that's really useful if we're going to be asked questions. The other thing I always ask my students is, well, why are we going to be asked questions and what will those questions be about? Well, the clue to that is actually in the word comprehension. If I asked someone, what does it mean to comprehend? Hopefully now you're at the stage where you could tell me, well, comprehension means understanding. So comprehension questions are essentially understanding questions. The story I give, and it's my favourite, is my little sister. If a little bit naughty, she would often have reading homework, but she would pretend to read her book. So she'd sit there for her 15 minutes and sort of, look at the ceiling, look out the window, but hold the book up and, look like she was doing it. And then it was my mum's job to come along and try and check if she'd done her homework. So my mum would ask her understanding questions, questions like, who was in the story? What did they do? Where was it? Where was the story taking place? When did it happen? And my favourite, what do you think will happen next? So it's these questions, the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why, are the classic comprehension questions, the classic testing of your understanding questions. And because we know that, because we are aware of the kind of things they're going to ask, it means, and as we should have learned in the first lesson, these are the kind of things we might be underlining. And I think last week we practiced underlining some of the who's and the where's. Well, we're going to do some more this week and focus again on underlining and picking out the who, the where, and the what this week, I believe. So they were the first skills that we covered in sort of week 1 and 2. So it was summarizing and underlining important info and the kind of info that's likely to be asked of us in questions. And then we now know it's the 5 W's. So it's the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why, that are the things we're most likely to be underlining. The other thing we started to learn about a bit last week was the harder style of questions, the kind of questions that require you to puzzle something out, and we called those inference. So the next thing I would ask you in my class is, what does it mean? What is an inference question? Why are inference questions harder? And well, inference questions are questions you have to work out and answer using clues and logic. And in fact, here's the dictionary definition of inference. So a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. So I always think it's very Sherlock Holmes. You've got to work out the puzzle using evidence and reasoning. Now, the reason inference questions are harder is because the answer isn't in the text. You can't just read a text saying John went to the shop. So the question says, what's his name? Well, John. Because it was in the text. Those are easy. Inference questions are harder. And the example I think we covered last week was it asked you to name some of the objects used or needed to follow a set of instructions. And the instructions said, cut out a circle. Well, they didn't tell you to use scissors, but you had to infer to work out that scissors are necessary. And so, maybe a little bit of a game, I'll give you the example I gave to my class. I gave them some instructions and I said, okay, well, this is how you roast marshmallows. You light a fire, you put the marshmallows on sticks, and you hold the marshmallows over the fire until they're done. And then I asked my students to give me a list of the things they'd need. And so they labelled marshmallows and they labelled the little sticks to put the marshmallows on. And some of them mentioned wood, but only a couple, and only after they thought about it for a long time, mentioned, well, in my instructions I said to light a fire, but I didn't mention how. So perhaps it's up to you to infer that I might need matches or a lighter, or I might use a flint and steel. Now, what's interesting about inference questions and these slightly more open-ended questions is because they're not definitely right or wrong, you could use matches, but you could also use a flint and steel. Both of those ways are valid ways of making a fire in my story. It's not so much about you being perfectly accurate as it's about you being convincing. And so I'll always say with English, and this is certainly something you can take to your school lessons, don't worry, don't have sort of analysis paralysis in lessons about being perfectly correct. Instead, try and be maximally convincing. So if you have an idea, think it through and try and come up with some reasons, some justification, and then quite often you'll actually get the mark. So if you can say, I think as part of your marshmallow making kit, you'll need some way of making a fire, so I'd suggest matches. Well, that is a really good, well thought out, logical suggestion. And again, as we saw from the examples last week, I think you needed perhaps scissors or a knife to cut out the circle, but you also needed a bowl to hold the water, and there were a few objects that weren't actually named in the instructions, but you could have logically assumed were needed to carry them out nonetheless. Well, we'll also have some inference questions like that show up later. The first task I'm going to ask you all to do, please, is to read on page 13, Goth Girl and the Ghost of a Mouth. And, much as we mentioned, we're going to be using some of those skills. I want you to highlight and underline the who, the what, and the where. So that's 3 of our W's we're going to practice today. And copy the information to the table. Once you've done that, don't go any further. Simply resume the video and we'll check that you've done it correctly. Be aware, though, that there are 4 more slots, as in the example of the white nun who sometimes appeared in the long gallery, and the last slot might be a little tricky, so you in fact might have to think outside the box or use the same character, but in 2 different ways. So there's my clue. Anyway, everyone, pause the video here and resume when you're ready for the answers, because you've both underlined the text, but also filled in the relevant pages, or filled in the boxes at the bottom of the page. Okay, everybody, I'm ready to go through. So, here are some potentially valid answers. So obviously, you may have had the Black Monk, who occasionally haunted the Short Gallery. Notice it was the White Nun in the Long Gallery and the Black Monk in the Short Gallery. The Beige Curate, who slid down the banisters of the Grand Staircase. The Beige Curate, we'll come back to curate in a second, because that's a word I know not many people might have come across before. Then you have the main character, Aunt Ada, who is sitting cross-legged on the carpet. And the reason she's sitting cross-legged is so she can talk to our lovely mouse friend, which means I, the little mouse. And of course, in this part of the story, the little mouse was scuttling along the cobwebby corridor that it had never been to before. But also, of course, there's the mouse who was shimmering palely in the candlelight. And this was, I think, the hard thing to spot, that there was the mouse, describing where he had been, but also the mouse as Ada sees him, the small ghost who's shimmering in the candlelight. So that was the challenge. Now, what is a curate? A curate's a difficult word, might be worth putting it down, or definitely worth putting in a word and meaning book. A curate is a bit like a caretaker. So you have caretakers at school. They're a bit like sort of handymen, janitors, people who look after, but they're a caretaker for a church. And that's probably the best example I can give. So a curate, and a curate really, his job is to help the priest and help with the running of a church. So he might be a butler, he might be a cleaner, he might be a caretaker, he might fix things. He's not the one who does the talking to the congregation, the people who come to listen to the service, but he still helps keep the church running and does all the important odds and jobs around the house. So the beige curate, obviously, dressed in beige, someone who obviously fixed up the house. And just remember that, because that might come up in handy for a question I'm going to ask you later. So now, on to the next page, so page 14. Could you please go through and answer the 3 questions? Then I want you to try and create your own, but just remember what I said about inference questions. These questions here, these create your own, they're really good because they get you thinking. But my challenge to you is, with your own questions, try and make them a little bit more inference-based than just who, what, when, where. And I realise these are who, what, and where questions, but you might still be able to come up with a few ideas. I know a few of my students before managed to come up with some questions that required just a little bit of thinking, a little bit more than just outright reading. And again, imagine you're trying to catch out my little sister or catch out a sibling of your own who's pretending to read this passage but hadn't really. What questions might you ask them to catch them out? That's the way to think about these. And of course, you need to have both a question and an answer. And as well as that, because I was again talking about inference, I think it's such an important skill, I've thrown in a bonus question, and I've tried to make this the toughest inference question I can. And the question is as follows. So please, guys, do, after you finish this, if you want a bit of a challenge, try and jot down an answer to this. And the question is, do you think that the church replaced the beige curate with someone else? And then I'm going one step further. I want you to justify your answer. And actually, guys, I think that there's a possible reason for yes and a possible reason for no. And I'll give you my answer at the end. So there's a little bonus challenge question, just for fun, just to really test those inference muscles out, because I think inference questions are so interesting. And that was the one that I actually used as my extra question that I would have filled in. So if you come up with something similar to this, amazing. Right then, guys, what I'm going to ask, pause the video here, and when you're ready for some answers, come on back. Okay, I'm about to go through the answers, guys, so pause the video if you need more time. And let's have a look. So answers to question 1. Let's reveal. So question 1, what happened in the long gallery? Well, the white nuns sometimes appeared in the long gallery. Then, number 2, who never said anything but mumbled, wailed, or sang? Bit of a tough question, number 2, actually, because the white nun, the black monk, and the curate are all mentioned as being the group of people who never said anything. Let me just show you in the text. It says here, it says, they usually mumbled, wailed softly, or in the case of the curate, sang, unlike the mouse. So what it's really saying is all the ghosts except the mouse, are the group who wail, mumble, and sing. Then for question 3, where had the mouse never been to before? Well, the mouse had never been to the corridor of a dusty, cobwebby part of the house, as it mentions in the text. Now I've got here some example who, what, and where questions, although I do think these are a bit boring, so if you manage to make them more exciting than these, really well done. So it's who was in the short gallery, the black monk, what did the beige curate do? Well, he slid down the banisters, and where was Ada sitting? And she was sitting on the carpet. So they're okay, and they're fine, but hopefully you managed to come up with some more interesting ones. Now, to those who managed to answer my challenge inference question, I think this is quite interesting because there's 2 possible answers. So, first off, do you think that the church replaced the beige curate with somebody else? You could have said yes, and here's a possible reason. Because the beige curate is now a ghost, he's not doing his job anymore, so someone will have needed to have taken over his job. And if you'd said that in my class, I'd have given you 1 mark and actually 1 bonus token for doing so well. So if you said that because the beige curate is a ghost, and obviously ghosts means sadly he's died, he's not doing his job anymore, maybe the church will have needed to replace the curate. I think it's worth a mark. But, and I think this is what I was going for when I asked this question, this is my super tough challenge question. If you manage to say no, because part of a curate's job is to clean, and we hear about the mouse finding a cobwebby, dusty bit of floor, and that probably means that when the curate died, they haven't replaced him yet. If you thought through that chain of logic, that to me was worth 2 marks and 2 tokens, because I think that was a really difficult piece of inference. And again, we might be wrong, but it's a perfectly valid inference from what we've read so far. And you guys will have to read perhaps the rest of the book for me and tell me if that's true. But the fact that the curate's job is to clean, as we discussed, and that part of the law was cobwebby and dusty, it might mean they haven't replaced him or they haven't got around to replacing him yet. To me, that seems like a really strong piece of inference, which is, again, makes that quite a tough question. So I was quite proud of that question, which is why I decided to ask it to you as a bonus point and award potentially some bonus tokens for it. So well done if you got that. Right, on to the next. This text is from Tony Robinson's Weird World of Wonders, and this is fascinating and a really good book if you want to read it. Really interesting, some really cool history. What I'm going to ask very simply is please read the text, and again now look, we're doing the who and the what that you're going to underline, and so I just want you to very quickly read through the passage here, underlining the who and the what for me, and then we'll go on to answer some questions. But again, we'll do the who and the what first. So hopefully you're ready now to look at some of the things you could have underlined. And if you look here, here are some quite important who's, here are some quite important what's, and they've even given you a where at the end as well that you might have underlined. So who, what's, and where's. Take a moment just to check them off against your list, see if you caught them all. Very well done if you did. Again, just remember there's a balance. So as I was underlining, I might be just underlining sort of the important bits. Charles of Sweden, favourite cat to going through. But again, with the underlining, you want to be as precise as you can. I say less is more. So don't be over. It's a difficult balance. You don't want to over underline stuff, nor do you want to under underline stuff. So never easy. Right. On now to the questions. So there's 1, 2, 3 questions to please to answer, and then I would like you to come up with some questions. And again, here's where I want you to start thinking. Make them some inference questions. Try and make them a bit more challenging if you can. Try and think outside the box a little bit. Really good way to stretch your skills. And just be aware that for obviously this one here, you need to come up with a possible question that could have this answer. But if you want to earn a bonus point, and again, this is the kind of thing where I'd be awarding tokens in my online lesson, there are actually 3 possible questions you could ask, and all 3 of these questions could be answered by this one response. So if you want a bonus reward, challenge yourself, try and come up with all 3 responses that could be answered by this question, and see if you can do that. And if you can, again, points means prizes, that's definitely worth some tokens. So again, I suggest starting, pause the video here, and when you're ready to go through the answers with me, just unpause the video, and we'll get on with it. Okie dokie, hopefully we're all ready. So, who was heartbroken when King Edward died? And the answer, of course, is his dog Caesar was heartbroken. Oh, it was very sad. And I had a few saying his wife, but from the context, you see, he says his master's door, and also his. That was perhaps the biggest clue as to why it's not his wife. But also, you can ask your mum's this. If dad said he was the master of the house, I think certainly if it was my mum, he'd get hit by a slipper, I think. So definitely the dog, not the wife. Number 2, what the question was, what did the dog do for days after the master had died? Very sad. He spent days outside his master's bedroom, whining, making that ooh, that sort of sad dog noise, and refusing to eat. Very sad. Poor puppy. Poor dog. And then finally, what did Caesar do during the king's funeral? And this is really nice. He walked behind his coffin, so he went on the parade at the end to sort of say goodbye, which again I think is very sweet and a very, very loyal dog. Now on to the create your own. So what are the 3 questions that you could have asked? Well, funnily enough, it's a who question, a what question, and a where question. Because of course you could have said, who filled the palace with animals? Well, it was Ferdinand who did. What did Ferdinand fill his Naples palace with? Well, he filled them with animals. And you could have said, where did Ferdinand fill his palace with animals? And it was in Naples, which is in Italy. So Ferdinand was the king of Italy. And some other example questions you could have had. So you could have said, what did the king do rather than disturb his cat? And rather than disturb his cat, he wrote around him, which again I think is very cute. Who was famous for keeping pet monkeys? Queen Elizabeth of Bohemia was famous for keeping pet monkeys. What did people say the Queen liked better than her own children? Her monkeys. Which I'm sure isn't true, but could certainly seem that way. Right, guys, so there are the questions. Again, pause here if you want to just copy any of these down. Remember, guys, when you're marking, don't just be ticking answers or crossing, certainly not crossing and finishing. If you do have a mistake or you do have an answer that's incomplete, my recommendation, cross it, but then add to it, make corrections. You should always be improving your answers, not just ticking crossing, but tick, cross, and improve. Tick, cross, and correct. And in that way, you are learning, you are developing, and you can still be earning those rewards for getting, green tokens and for doing really well because you've made that improvement, you've learned, and you've demonstrated improvement. So important. So the last thing we're just going to look at here is your CEM book. So in the closed test book here, I'd like you please to turn to the section 3 word banks on the railway children. Let me just find out for you the page number. I believe that was page 32 to 33. So page 32 to 33 on the railway children. Page 32 to 33. And here, just some tips I can give you. So this is another style of closed question, and this is where you're taking words from the above. Now, each of these will only be used once, but this is one really important thing, and I know people are loath to leave empty spaces, and so sometimes, and this is actually true and can be good exam technique, they'll have a guess. But there's one issue with these questions. If, for example, I guess, I don't unjust they, so I've put in unjust because I've just had a random guess. Now, obviously, unjust is wrong. It doesn't fit in this slot. But the problem is, because I've just used unjust in a slot that's wrong, and I did it because I had a guess, I can't now use unjust anywhere else. So not only am I going to lose a mark for guessing here, because if I am forced to guess, I'm probably getting it wrong. But now, because I can't use unjust here, I'm not going to be able to use unjust where it should be. So I'm going to lose another mark somewhere else. And perhaps because I don't have unjust that I want to put in the correct space, I'm going to guess and use another word in the wrong space because I'm guessing and because I'm not just leaving spaces. So now I've made another mistake, which leads to another. So with this style of question, where you've only got one word that is going to go in one correct spot, please don't guess straight away. Now, if you've done the whole passage and you've only got 2 spaces left and 2 words, and you've read both words, you're not sure, and you just want to have a go, by all means, write them down, hope you get lucky. It's a 50-50 chance. But certainly with these questions, my advice would be to, if you're not sure, star the question, move on, answer the rest, cross out as you go, and then you'll find, because you've been crossing out answers as you go, you've now got a reduced range of options. So when you then come back to look at a question again, and maybe now there are only sort of 4 options to choose from, you'll either be able to make a better guess if you really have to, or hopefully you'll end up with only just 1 space left and 1 word left. That would be the ideal situation. So for these, just to be really clear, although in some styles of questions guessing is okay, it's not worth guessing with these, especially not at the beginning. And if you are going to guess, make sure it's right at the very end when you've exhausted every other possible option. And ideally, you've got either 1 space and 1 option, or maybe just 2 spaces and 2 options. And that way, you're leaving it to the last minute. What you're not doing is you're not guessing straight away and doubling up on your mistake. So that was just a bit of a tip with the style of closed question, really important. But again, I've seen it before, and you end up with this just cascade of wrong answers. So very much best to avoid that. So for this style of question, don't guess straight away. That's the takeaway message. Right, guys, it's a 6-minute task. I'm not actually that concerned if it takes you longer than 6 minutes. So if it does take you longer to finish, that's fine. I would rather, certainly at this stage, I would rather you try the question properly. So off you go now, guys. Make a start for me, please. And then we'll go through the answers together when you are ready. So again, pause the video. Right, guys, I'm about to run through the answers, so hopefully you are ready. Let me just get my own answers open on the right page. So, the railway question, children. What I'm going to do, guys, for this is I'm going to just simply read through the passage and try and cross out the answers as I go. So, they were not railway children to begin with, I don't suppose. They had ever thought about railways except as a means of getting to Marsklin and Cook's, the pantomime, Zoological Gardens, and Madame Tussauds. These are all locations in London. They were first ordinary suburban children, and they lived with their father in an ordinary red-brick fronted villa with coloured glass in the front door, a tiled passage that was called a hall, a bathroom with hot and cold water, electric bells, French windows, and a good deal of white paint, and every modern convenience, as the house agents say. So your answers to the first section. They're not ordinary railway children to begin with. I don't suppose they had ever thought about railways except as a means of getting to those locations. So there are the answers. I've written them in for you because that makes it slightly easier. I've just noticed, sorry, to change that to coloured with the English spelling, not the Americanized, so C-O-L-O-U-R-E-D, that's important. And as I said, I've crossed them off, we might as well just quickly go through. So we've got suppose ticked off there, so let's tick it this way. We've used suppose, we've used tiled, we've used coloured, we've used their father, and then convenience. Where's convenience? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm missing one more. Ordinary. Where's ordinary? There. So there's the ones we've used so far. So let's take a snip of that and go on to the next page so we can keep going. So if we carry on, there were 3 of them. Roberta was the eldest, of course. Mothers never have favourites, but if their mother had a favourite, it might have been Roberta. Next came Peter, who wished to be an engineer when he grew up. And the youngest was Phyllis, who meant extremely well. So we just quickly type those in. So eldest was Roberta. Mothers never have favourites. Wanted to be an engineer. And who meant extremely well. Oh, and the youngest was Phyllis, excuse me. So there's some answers. Mother did not spend all her time in paying dull calls to dull ladies and sitting dully at home waiting for dull ladies to pay call to her. She was almost always there, ready to play with the children and read to them and help them do their homework, their home lessons. Besides this, she used to write stories for them while they were at school and read them aloud after tea. And she always made up funny pieces of poetry for their birthdays and for other great occasions, such as christenings of new kittens. So if we just go through number 12, there, she was always there, ready to play. Besides this was at 13, so it's capital B because it's a new sentence. So besides this, she used to write them stories. Sounds like good fun. And read them aloud after tea. And other great occasions. Okay, so again, there are the words. If you want to see, copy them down, by all means pause the video. And again, we had eldest, youngest, favourite, engineer, besides, occasions. There. So then on to the last page, take one more snip of this. And then, this one carries on, such as the christening of new kittens, the refurnishing of the doll's house, or the time when they were getting over the mumps. So refurnishing. Refurnishing. And of course, refurnishing is a bit like redecorating, except it's buying new furniture. So your furnishings are your furniture. These 3 lucky children always had everything they needed. Pretty clothes, good fires, a lovely nursery with heaps of toys, and Mother Goose wallpaper. They had a kind and merry nursemaid, and a dog who was called James, and who was their very own. They also had a father who was just perfect. Never cross, never unjust, which means unfair, and always ready for a game. At least, if any time he was not ready, he always had an excellent reason for it. And explained the reason to the children so interestingly and funnily that they felt sure that he couldn't help himself. So he explained why he couldn't play. whenever he couldn't play, which is a lovely thing to do. So there. And again, extremely, refurnishing, unjust. Oh, you know, we missed obviously before was reading stories aloud. It's across of aloud. And that's it, guys. Oh, excellent. So there's your answers. Hopefully that makes sense. Interesting story, The Railway Children. There's quite a good television film that you can watch if you're interested. But also, I must say, equally good book and well worth a read. And especially valuable because any of these classics, and this is now sort of considered a classic book, it's an older story. Not only can you find them available quite often now for free online, so they can be read for free, but also the punctuation and the way they use their words tends to be very, very good. Nowadays, the punctuation quality isn't as good as it once was. And so, just looking at this passage, for example, you can see the use of punctuation, the use of words is fantastic. So if you can read these, it's really good practice and a really good way of developing your skills for both practicing comprehension, but also for your own creative writing, which could be useful at school. We do recommend that. Okay then guys, so just a quick reminder, final bit then for the homework, you need to go to your CEM closed test workbook and do some of the questions. So it's pages 30, well it's tests 12, test 13, tests 14, and tests 15. There's quite a few closed banks tests in there, but they're really good. It's a range of different styles. And then also, of course, a little bit in the Collins Comprehension Booster, we just want you to do test 7 on the Little Princess. I believe we're comprehension. So if you can make the best of that, of course, please do. But other than that, guys, that really sums everything. So thanks so much for paying attention today. You've been really good. I hope it was useful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in contact. Okay, everybody, thank you so much and well done. Bye-bye.